Okay, hello again. Now we're going to have a little tutorial on using white chalk pastel, which creates amazing effects just as the charcoal does. Now the pencil here is a white medium chalk pastel. You can see the end, which looks quite uneven. Now that's because I've sharpened it with a paring knife, with a kitchen knife, because sometimes all the way through the center, it can be a little bit soft. So if you're sharpening it with a traditional pencil sharpener, it can twist the chalk through the middle and then it breaks off into lots of little bits, which is really, really annoying. But if I'm just sharpening it with a knife, and that gives me quite a long point. If you don't know how to do that, that's fine. Use a normal sharpener. And here I have a stick of white chalk pastel. Now this isn't school chalk, this is, which is a pastel. It's much easier to smudge, and these are both exactly the same. And it might sound odd to use the same brand of chalk stick and chalk pencil, but you'd be amazed at how different the whites are from different brands. Some of them can look quite warm and creamy, and others can look quite cold and grey. So I know that these, when I use these two together, they're going to work really well. Now, of course, you do need black paper or a really dark coloured paper. I mean, brown would work as well, or in fact, any colour where the white is really going to stand out. I would always recommend using a white pencil to draw your shape. Now we're going to do exactly the same pear that we've been looking at for the charcoal. So I'm just free drawing the pear shape here. Just a little reminder, it's from that picture that we've been looking at. Okay, now of course I'm still going to incorporate the shadow underneath. Now, the really important thing to remember when you're using white chalk is that you are still creating the light and shade in exactly the same way. But this can be a relatively confusing way to start a drawing for some people. By the way, if you don't have one of the chalk pencils, you can use a graphite pencil on the black paper. It's metallic and will stand out, but it's just harder to see. So I try and use a white pencil when I'm just using the chalk, but don't worry if you, I'll just rub that out. So I'm just using the white on here. Don't worry if you need to use a graphite pencil to create your shape, that's absolutely fine. Now, when I've made the initial outline of the shape, now of course, when I'm looking at the photograph, you can see how this right-hand side is very light and this side is very dark. Now, this is a really key aspect for doing any drawings, and I want you to start thinking about this and looking at this more and more in your drawings. The line that I've drawn around the outside of the pear here in the white chalk, that is actually very light. So the line of the pear is going to become this light area of pear. However, on this side, the pear is completely dark. So by having a white line there, that doesn't actually make any sense, does it? Until you look at the picture again. And of course, the white line that I've drawn around the outside here, where I can see clearly there's the shape of the pear silhouetted against the background, and that's the key word, that the white line I've just drawn becomes the background. Now I'm just going to demonstrate that on here so it's much easier to see. Now, of course, the same applies to the pencil, that the pencil line you're drawing, or if you're using charcoal, the line becomes the shadow. Now here I will just show you. Now, first thing to do when you're using the white chalk, I would say straight away, create the background. What I've done here is I've just broken one of the large sticks of chalk into pieces because it's much easier to handle and I can use it nice and lightly on the side. Now, the white chalk can be quite hard to see when you're starting out by using it. Some people get a little bit confused about which is light and which is dark because you're so used to using a dark medium on a light paper. Now, I'm actually, even though this side of the pear was very light, I'm actually just going to go round here just to show how much easier it can be seeing a shape when you create the context of it, when you create the background. Now, straight away, even though I haven't filled in any detail there, you can tell, can't you, that that's a pear with a shadow and there's a context of environment to it. Now, I'm just going to smudge this in. This chalk is just gorgeous to use, and you really can get so many lovely results and effects with this, and it pulls together a realistic drawing, I think even faster than the charcoal. Just amazing. So I'm just going to smudge all the way around. Then you can see I'm just using my finger again, and finds it very easy to control. Now that has straight away created a shape of a pear, which makes it much easier for me to understand what's happening there. Now I'm going to take this one step further for you, and I'm going to suggest that for you to be able to fully see what's happening with this shape, that you actually do the same thing. Just lightly go over the pear shape. Now this chalk isn't the same as the charcoal, that where you draw with it you leave a scar. It's not the same. You can rub this out much more easily. Now if I fill that in with a little bit of grey, even though that's grey, I can still pick out, my brain still picks out that there's an object there which looks like a pear, there's the shadow, and there's a light coloured background. Now, do you remember what I said about the edge of the object in the photograph? So let's just look at this again. And you see how the edge of the pear is very, very light, and this side is very, very dark. So I want to make sure that this really, really stands out from the background. So you see here, this is the line I drew for the shape of the pear. And what I do, and I'm going to use the pencil here just to create a little bit of definition. Oh, another squeaky bit of chalk, bringing it round just to make that nice and defined. The great thing about this is that you can use the definition of the pencil as well as the softness of the chalk stick. I actually prefer using the chalk stick. So I'm emphasizing now this light side. So the line I drew for the edge of the object has now become the object. Remember in the very first introductory tutorial when I was explaining about light and shade and how we see? Remember, there are no lines anywhere. It's just a jigsaw of light and shade. And every line you see, every dark line you see, is a shadow. So never think about drawing a line. Always think about the division between light and shade. Now what you see here, you see how the chalk is starting to get a bit saturated. So as I'm rubbing it in, it's actually starting to come off, and I've got a very strong line around the outside where the pencil has stayed on. You see now when I'm rubbing with the pencil, how it actually starts to rub off some of the chalk. You'll probably find that using the stick, you can make it brighter, and you want to establish very early on your brightest and darkest areas. Now, the darkest areas, of course, in using chalk on black paper, I mean, you can't get any darker than the paper itself. So already having established my lightest tone with the strength of the chalk, I know I can't get any darker than the black paper. So I'm going to use the rubber to now draw in some of those shadows. Never think about the rubber just as erasing mistakes or changing the drawing to make it neater. It's not just about mistakes. The rubber can also, especially in this context, can draw out wonderful shadows for you. So remember that the left-hand side of the pear was very dark. So the line that I drew around the outside in white has become the background. And now I'm establishing those dark shadows. Because I smudged the chalk with my finger, it comes off incredibly easily. And I'm just rubbing a little bit with the putty rubber to get some of that soft transitional texture in between the light and the shade, which we learnt in the charcoal tutorial. and around here. But see how I'm just using it in a circular motion, and it picks up, look at that, it picks up the chalk on there. It's not going to come back on my picture if I don't want it to. But in this case, with that little bit of chalk there, if I rub back over, it doesn't completely rub away the chalk, but it allows me to move it around, and I can create lovely textural effects. Remember, it's this line through here which explains to the eye the texture of an object, where the light meets the dark. Now it does need to be darker on this side, so I'm going to remove all of that chalk there, and then I can add little bits bit by bit, but straight away you see how that just pops off the page. And I'm going to put some more chalk on here. I can use the same sort of dabbing, dotting technique with my finger that I did with the charcoal, just highlighting those wonderful light areas around here, a little bit of dabbing. I know that this is the really important part, and a bit of light underneath here. And of course we mustn't neglect the stalk. Now the stalk is very bright on one side and quite dark underneath, so I'm just going to dab that with my little finger. Of course you can use the same tools that you do with the charcoal. You can use a little cotton bud to give you a bit more precision, or just a piece of cardboard, or maybe you've got a whole set of blending tools which you've bought or somebody's given to you. But you know, just a bit of cardboard will do the same. Now we never want to have an outline like that. You see that the white line that I drew to create the edge of the stalk. Now remember, from the side of the pear, the line that I drew became the background, and it needs to be exactly the same here, because the underside of the stalk is very dark, and we don't want to look like it's stuck on or it's outlined. So I'm actually just going to, I've created my quite solid area of putty rubber, and I'm just going to draw in that dark shadow again. See, a little bit of chalk's come off there, and use the pencil just to put a bit of light back in on this side. Now this is the important bit. If I reinforce that edge of the stalk, the edge where the light meets the dark, see how I then blend that line into the background. So the line that's around the stalk becomes the lighter background. Anytime you're having difficulty with seeing what's in the drawing, what's in the picture, and how to translate it, you can quite literally say to yourself, what can I see? And sometimes that really, really helps when you explain to yourself, oh yeah, I can see that there's a dark shadow underneath the stalk. Let's just have a little look at the picture again. Now, the stalk has got quite a dark shadow underneath it with a very light background. So I need to make sure that the dark shape underneath, and it's got a very round end. You'll often find that you need to, because the putty rubber can't be very specific because it's quite a soft material. So maybe I find that if I'm rubbing out the end of the stalk to get that nice round knob at the end, then I need to just clean it up with the pencil. Remember that conversation between light and dark. And just softening then the marks of the pencil. So that starts to pop out greatly. So I'm just going to bring up the stalk there. Now, of course, because I've used the pencil on this side and not on this side, that looks a lot brighter than it does over here. So I'm just going to balance that on this side to make sure that it looks like the background is even, because I want the pear to be the hero of the piece. I want that to really stand out. Now the edge of the pear is actually quite sharp and clean despite the soft texture through the middle, and I'm just going to add a little bit of, it's just a tiny bit of dust on my finger there just to get a little bit of additional texture through here. Now there's one thing, and I'll just go back in with the rubber. Always that conversation between light and dark. And you see how much that now starts to look like lumpy bumps in the pear. Little porous, textured, lumpy pear bits. Yeah, amazing, isn't it? How quickly. It's just understanding how we see. Makes it very easy to use these materials when you really understand what it is you're looking at. And you'll always, as I said, find that you're putting on a bit too much, taking off a bit too much, always just going back and forth with the light and the shade. Now, there's one bit that should stand out incredibly to you as not being right, and that's this bit here. Now, that is because we know that there's a very dark shadow under here, but when I was drawing the shape of the pear, of course, the line that I drew using the white pencil made a very bright space under there. Now, that doesn't make sense to our brain because we know that there's a shadow here. So how could there possibly be light hitting the area of the pear here like it is there if this is in shadow? So we need to make sure that that changes. So just a little reminder of the picture again. See how very dark it is underneath here with the bottom of the pear. Now, in actual fact, the edge of the pear here, where my white line is, now remember, if I've drawn a line there, it must be because I can see a line, I can see a change of light in the original photograph. So this line, it does exist, but it's a transition of light and shade. So I just need to figure out which way my line is going. So here, the white line, actually, you can see how the pear is darker than the background. So my white line becomes the background, but here, the shadow directly underneath the pear is much darker. So my white line becomes the pear. So there's a change about here. So there, my line turns into the pear. Now this is probably going to be much too bright and light, and it does look too bright because the brain understands if the light is from here, the shadow's there. How could this be light? So this is where we can use the putty rubber, just a bit of press and lift, just to soften this, make it much darker looking, but we've still got that clear understanding of which side of my original line is light and which is dark, and that makes the shape really come alive. And then you never want to have any outlines anywhere in your picture. So by outlines, I mean the lines that you originally draw, those divisions between light and shade, you need to make sure that they blend into the background or into the object. So here, the edge of the shadow which I drew there, needs to become the table, just as it does here. And the edge of the pear there, where I drew, of course, as we know, became the bright side of the pear. This turned into the background. And this area now, that's much clearer, isn't it? To our understanding of, we can still see the shape of the pear. Just blow away these little bits. We can still see the shape of the pear, but now it's far clearer where the dark is, and it really looks like that is sitting down on the table. So again, just bringing back a little bit, there's a little bit of a reflection actually from the table, just on that little bit of pear just there. When you look at the photograph, you'll be able to see. So you can see how easy it is to create. I mean, look at that. It just in a very short period of time, it pops off the paper. You can just keep working on moving it around. And of course you can use some fixative to seal this so you don't lose that lovely drawing, but it just looks so three-dimensional, doesn't it? Straight away, amazingly quick. This could well become your favorite set of tools ever. Now, have a practice and have some real fun with it, okay?